welcome, a special welcome from Future Ready Collier to Dr. Michelle Shoemate. Dr. Shoemate recently addressed FCAN, the Florida College Access Network, and you heard Charlita Richardson bring her greetings. And it was certainly compelling, her background and her deep expertise in collective impact work. And so we invited Dr. Shoemate to address Future Ready Collier, knowing this would be a great learning opportunity for us. As we know, certainly our local context, we also always want to continue learning and growing on what is possible, what is out there, how can we continue to grow as a network and grow individually as organizations. Dr. Shoemate is the founding director of the Network for Nonprofit and Social Impact, as well as a professor at Northwestern University. She has an upcoming book on networks for social impact that will certainly resonate with our work. And we're excited to welcome Dr. Shoemate to Future Ready Collier. Dr. Shoemate.
Thank you so much, Peggy. I'm excited to be here and to get a chance to share some of my work with you and to give you a chance to talk with one another. And so this is going to be an interactive presentation. If you're eating lunch at your desk, that's absolutely okay, but be forewarned, I will put you into a breakout room eventually. So that's going to be part of what we do today. So my presentation today is really focusing on networks that create a social impact. The image that you see here is from the upcoming book, but today really I'm going to focus not on the book, but I'm going to focus on some results that we have from a national study looking at collective impact organizations like you who are focusing on education. And so half of these networks, of the 26 networks, are collective impact networks. They adhere to at least the initial standards of what the collective impact means, so that's a moving target. And then half of them operate maybe saying they're early stage collective impact, or they're kind of collective impact, or they're doing something else entirely. So what you see up here is a map of all of the different networks that participated in our research. You'll notice there's two in Florida that you might be interested in who they are. One of them is the education networks that are sponsored through the United Way of Miami-Dade. And the other one is the Delray Beach Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And so those are the two local Florida networks that participated in the study. What I'm talking about today is part of that research. If you're interested in the full set of reports, I've put the link up to those reports that are downloadable for free, and you're welcome to check those out. But I wanted to give you that background so that you know where some of this content is coming from before we really launch into today. So with that said, today my topic is really going to focus on a central question. And that's, how do networks create a social impact? And that's an interesting question because networks are harder to manage and require more resources than it takes to manage the set of organizations in the network. So it's not enough to say that networks make a social impact because organization 1 does this thing and organization 2 does this other thing. There needs to be a value add for coming together. The whole has to be more than the sum of the parts. And so that's what we're really going to be talking about today is, what are things that networks like Future Ready Collier do that can't be done by individual organizations working in your community? What is really the thing that makes a network worth the effort? And that's where we're going to focus all of the rest of our time. And so to do that, I want us to actually start by thinking about what's a theory of change. So a theory of change, if you've been running around the nonprofit world or the education world for long enough, has been some of the jargon that you've seen probably tossed around. What I want to point out about a theory of change is it's really, at its definition here that comes from Andrea Anderson, is how a group of early and intermediate accomplishments sets the stage for producing long-term change, right? So there's a couple of things to note here. One is where you are now as a network might be setting the stage for the next best thing that you're going to do. That because you already have a trajectory of short and intermediate accomplishments where you're building trust, where you're establishing great programs, where you're beginning to see traction on outcomes in terms of student achievement, where you're beginning to do all those things, that doesn't mean the work is done. What that might mean is you're setting the stage for your next great thing. The second thing I want to note about this definition is it's an explanation. It's an explanation of how do you do that? It's a mental map of what all of this effort, all of this meeting and working groups and coming together and attending these collaborative sessions. What is it about that that actually translates into the outcomes that you're hoping to see at the student level? That's what we're after today. What's the theory of change that explains what Future Ready Collier's next chapter is going to look like? So setting that as the stage, I want you to begin to think about these hows. So I've got 3 hows up here. And the first how is, how does your organization individually contribute to the goals that Future Ready Collier set out for? That's an important piece. The second how I want you to think about, though, is a little further. How does your work in the network contribute to a thriving and healthy group of organizations working together towards a common agenda? Here's my third how. How does Future Ready Collier together as a network get to the social impact that you're trying to achieve? That's what we're talking about in a theory of change for a network. It's not simply to look at the programs that each organization offers, and it's not enough to say what you individually get out of as an organization being in the network, or that you can contribute to it. There's something that's bigger than that. It's the how of the network. And that's what we're going to be going after today. So to get us ready for that, I'm going to put you in your first breakout discussion. I warned you it was coming, right? So all of you who are now eating knew that you were going to do this. Here's my breakout discussion for you. So we had a wonderful short presentation reminding you about Future Ready Collier's alignment with the future makers. And they aim to increase the number of college degrees, certificates, and high quality credentials from 27 to 55% by 2025. In breakout groups, what I want you to discuss is your how. Really, how does your organization contribute to this goal through its involvement in the network, right? So not how you contribute to it individually through your organization's individual programs, but how does your participation in the network move this goal forward? And to handle coordination for that, I am going to stop my share and hand it over to David.
Yeah, and I'm going to give you a quick intro. We're going to send you to breakouts in just a half second. Many of you are going to see on the screen something that looks familiar, and there's a link in the chat to what's called a mural board. Many of you have used this on other Zoom facilitations. I'm going to do a quick orientation for those of you who haven't. The link will open Mural in your web browser, but you're also seeing it right now in Zoom, so don't get confused by 2 versions on your screen. We will turn mine off in a minute because you're going to go into breakout rooms. First thing you have to know is how to turn off all these annoying cursors. Go down to your circle. You are always the circle next to the smiley face. And if you click on it, you will see, don't show me cursors. And magically they all go away, so now I don't have to watch all the other cursors on the screen. You should be able to move around and zoom in and out through whatever your standard mouse or trackpad functions are. They tend to be pretty intuitive. And if you have any questions or challenges with that, there's a command window over in the right. And you're just going to record answers on Post-its when you guys talk in your groups. Anybody can record an answer. There's no appointed recorder. Click on a Post-it, type your answer, right? So we coach kids. My computer's being slow, of course, but you can sort of just start typing. You can double click and get a new Post-it if you run out of Post-its, and keep going. You can change sizes, move them around. jump in together in your groups and just start sharing lots of ways in which you all contribute to this work by working together. So that is your prompt. I am 100% sure every group will have people in it who have been inside Mural before. So if you're having trouble with Mural, don't worry about it. Share in your group and let people post for you. With that, I think it's Carla or Kristen who is sending us all to sessions. We have 35, 36 of you in Mural, so we are good. Let's go to breakout rooms.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for your participation on the mural boards. And I'm just going to echo what David said, that you have a lot of great work there. So just to kind of recap where you've been, right? We were talking about theory of change. What's the how? How does a network actually move the needle on social issues in a way that the organizations within the network couldn't do alone? And so on the mural board, hopefully you started to see some connections. Oh, okay, you do that. Maybe you didn't know somebody in your group did a particular type of thing, or that they were adding something new. And so you're starting to see a little bit more of your collective how. I'm going to amplify that now and talk about 3 common hows, 3 common theories of change that we see in education networks across the country. So one theory of change that explains how networks make a difference that organizations cannot do alone is project. And by project, this is usually the most familiar of the types. It means that organizations in the network get together to create new programs, new services, new initiatives that wouldn't have been possible with one organization alone. The project-based theory of change is all about the quality of those programs and projects. If they're great programs, if they have good reach, if they get to the right students, you end up moving the needle. And if they're not great programs or projects, they don't, right? So it's all about the quality of that implementation that ultimately determines whether that theory of change works. But it's one way that networks move the needle. A second theory of change is learning. So in comparison to the previous theory of change, networks who specialize in learning aren't necessarily creating lots of new. There aren't necessarily lots of new programs going on. There aren't necessarily new initiatives. What's happening instead is all of the organizations in the network are learning how to do what they already do better. They improve the quality of the existing programs and services, and by doing so, they end up moving the needle on student achievement. Last theory of change is systems alignment. Systems alignment is about figuring out how different programs that are already in the community fit together. And often this happens down at the zip code or at the individual student level. And so I'm going to be giving you some examples of that going forward. But the key idea here is, again, not new programs, not new services, and not necessarily learning how to make those programs and services better, but instead figuring out how do they layer on top of each other so that they provide complementary benefits and meet other types of needs that might be barriers to the effectiveness of the complementary program. So those are 3 ways that networks move the needle on student achievement. Let me go back to this research now. So we looked at 26 education networks across the United States. And you might be curious, which ones were more successful than others? And as always, the devil's in the details when it comes to success, right? So what do I mean by success? Let's start with that. Because we're doing a national study and you all are intimately familiar with the very diverse landscape of metrics running around when it comes to education outcomes, we chose the ones that were readily available. So in this research, success is better than statewide trends year over year since the network was founded in student achievement in 4th grade and 8th grade literacy and high school graduation rates, controlling for student need measured in free and reduced lunch rates, and demographics, particularly the percentage of Black and Hispanic students. And so whenever we saw networks that were able to achieve success in any of these 3 metrics, 4th grade, 8th grade, or high school graduation in terms of their trend lines, we said they were successful. And networks who didn't differ from their statewide trends or who were performing less well than their statewide trends were not successful. Out of the 26, 8 met our criteria for success, right? So the first kind of takeaway from this research is it's difficult to move the needle when it comes to district-wide, or in some cases county-wide or multi-county-wide systems, right? It's not very common. But in the cases of those 8 networks, we found 2 approaches, 2 paths that led to success. And maybe here's the second point for you to take forward. There's more than one way to get to success, right? There's more than one network design. And I'm going to show you both of them and then tell you the story of some networks who got there. So first network design I want to talk about is the network design around project-based theory of change, right? So in this network, you had very decentralized leadership, and there's several of these, but I'm going to be talking about the one in Grinnell right now. So you had decentralized leadership, and you had lots of new projects and initiatives. And in the case of the Grinnell campaign for grade level reading, all of their outcomes are higher than statewide trends. Their trend line is separate and apart from what they're seeing across Iowa. So what did they do? They have a really interesting theory of how this is going to operate. They are running, the backbone for this is Grinnell College, but their staff for the campaign for grade level reading is all AmeriCorps. But they are not the typical AmeriCorps that you and I might be thinking of. Many of their AmeriCorps are former retired teachers who have come back to lead these task forces and to really think about how does Grinnell get its handle around improving literacy. So they have task forces related to school readiness, to summer learning, to attendance, particularly around chronic absenteeism, around healthy readers, which is their nutrition kind of program, an exercise program, and after school enrichment. And all of those task forces are led by a dedicated AmeriCorps. And they all create dedicated programs and services and initiatives, and they're trying to think about how to use some of that foundational work that the Campaign for Grade Level Reading has done, this research-based practice, in order to move the needle forward. And they've done it. One thing that's important to note about this particular pathway is in our research, it only worked in small communities. So one of the pictures that you see up here on the slide to your far right is downtown Grinnell, Iowa. It's a really small town. It's a rural area. And so they have about under 10,000 people, according to the latest census. It's tiny. And so they can get their handle around all of their kids by just producing enough programs and services to reach them. But it's one way that networks like Grinnell move the needle on student achievement. So I said that there are 2 pathways. Let me talk about the pathway that works for larger communities. So the pathway that works for larger communities in our research combines 2 of the theories of change that I talked about: learning and systems alignment. In larger communities, they cannot program their way out to better student achievement in the longer term. You can't get there. It's not about more programs. It's not about more initiatives. Instead, it's about finding a way to do continuous quality improvement of existing programs and services and doing a systems alignment so that there's complementarity across different programs and services. So let's put a little flesh on that. Let me talk to you about one of our networks that's successful. So Learn to Earn Dayton is in Dayton, Ohio. It actually covers the entire county and several different school districts within that county. And it's a really interesting, long-standing collective impact initiative. It's part of the Strive Together model. The thing that stands out for me about Learn to Earn Dayton is the way that it's implemented its learning initiatives. So I've got 2 pictures up here, one of a very precious and cute kid. I love this picture so much. He just makes me smile. But it represents, the reason I have him up here is because one of their learning communities has been in the preschool area. Here's how this works in practice. They have every preschool, even before kids get to kindergarten, could do a readiness assessment. They collect that data at the preschools. They do a couple of different things with it, but for our purposes, one of the things they do is they compare preschools one to another. And they have identified which preschools are high performing for particular student demographics and overall both, and which ones are poorer performing. The poorer performing preschools in the area have the opportunity to send their teachers to be part of a learning cohort. In that learning cohort, they learn about great practices in preschool education. They learn about unique ways of dealing with behavioral problems and promoting social emotional learning. They learn about what the other preschools in the area have been doing that works. They get mentoring in that way. And in doing so, they've improved their kindergarten readiness scores year over year since they've implemented it, because they're able to use that data to target where there needs to be more learning. They've done a similar thing in their high schools, which is that second picture up here. In their high schools, they know that in ninth grade, when you get to your end of your first semester, if you run on the semester system or trimester system, the grade point average that you have in ninth grade is highly predictive of what your results will be at the end of high school. It's a really early indicator. So what did they do? They compared all of the high schools in their region one to another, and they identified schools that were performing well in this area, in this early transition between middle school and high school, and the schools that were struggling. And then they got those principals together, they put them in a learning community, and that learning community then helped them establish goals for what they were going to do to make sure that their ninth graders were achieving at the rate that they wanted them to achieve. So that's the learning theory of change. So this gets me to a question I'd like you to participate in the chat with me on. What I'd love you to do in the chat is to tell me, in Future Ready Collier, what other organizations would be in your learning community? Who does things that are similar to you or comparable to you, that if you were you could sit down and have a conversation about, you could get better at what you're already doing, not necessarily doing anything new. So I'd love to see that in the chat. I'm going to give you a minute to think about that. You can go ahead and identify, don't have to identify every single organization, but just a few of them, that would be great. While you're looking at that, and while you're seeing what other people have, be looking for your name to appear in other people's learning communities too. I want to talk about the thing that they combine learning with. And that is really around systems alignment. So when we talk about systems alignment, what we're talking about is complementary programs and services. We're trying to identify other types of organizations that might be different from you, who offer programs and services that might help your students or your families do better, because they are also at the same time receiving those programs and services, right? Complementarity. So I'm going to send you to a really short breakout room. We're going to have really about 6 minutes, right? So super short. But I'm going to send you back to your breakout rooms. And what I'd like you to do is to identify what are some of the organizations and community groups who you think have the most influence on educational and post-secondary outcomes for children. And I want you to think broadly. So don't just immediately think the schools. The schools certainly have a role to play. And I'm really excited about all of your announcements that your schools have made. But there's some other organizations in your community who have an impact on this too. I'd really like you to think about those. So 6 minutes into breakout, and then come back and we will talk more about systems alignment.
And real quick, we're not using Mural this time. Just have the conversation and we'll do a quick poll when you come back to see what your answers were.
Welcome back. The rooms are going to be closing for another 30 seconds. So this is that moment where we wait for everybody to join us in the room.
And I think we are now all back. So everybody needs to sort of reorient yourself to the Zoom screen for one more second. We're going to put the poll up, and you get to select as many answers as you want. But what has the most influence on making progress? So pick a couple. So there's 73 of you here. I only got 28 votes so far. Oh, 30. There we go. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. Looks like we got over 60 responses on this. If I end the poll, I think you're going to see the results on the screen real quick. So an interesting mix, lots of different sort of responses here, high in family and social work and youth serving nonprofits. And we'll connect this with the mural board and make sure it's part of the content we share back out with everybody.
All right. Thanks, David. So I wanted you to think about this question because it's key to the idea of systems alignment. Because often, at least traditionally in education, we've thought about there being different slices of different providers who help students and families. And so some of those providers are certainly schools and education providers, care and education, but there's also folks in health and safety and social services and local employment and parents, family, and community who also play a role. And that's part of the foundational realization around systems alignment approaches, that it's not just one group who can play a role, but it's trying to align folks across these different sectors so that the system works together. We're back to the whole is more than the sum of the parts. So let me give you some grounded examples of how this works. One of our successful networks is the Hartford Partnership for Student Success in Hartford, Connecticut. They adopted a community-based schools approach to improving student outcomes. What's interesting about a community-based schools approach is it's ultimately about systems alignment. It means thinking about how do you align after school, weekend, and summer programs so it complements what's already going on in the school day. It means thinking about shared site leadership teams so that all of the teachers who touch a student and parents and social workers who might be on site at school have a team plan for each student. It's about integrating student supports. In the case of Hartford Partnership for Student Success, or for school success, they brought in physicians. They had an actual health clinic on site for their school. They had a dental clinic and an eye clinic on school property. You could pick up food for the weekend and for the evening, so you could get food services there. It all became a one-stop shop. The school becomes and functions like a neighborhood hub in a community-based schools approach. And that hub meant that after school, parents who want to go back and get their degree or to finish a program could go back and attend parent enrichment programs or complete their education and head towards a credential. It becomes the one place where everything operates. In doing this, they aligned a lot of systems because teachers would know this kid only really gets in trouble before lunch on Monday. And anybody in education knows that that means that that kid was hungry over the weekend. So they could begin to think about what does that mean for putting together a team around this kid? You have all the supports there from social services. Could you make an integrated plan and come around this kid who needs additional support and help? That's Hartford Partnership for School Success. The community-based schools approach is one approach, but it's certainly not the only way that networks in our research did systems alignment. And so let me give you some examples of other things that people have done. One of the ways that Voyage in North Carolina operates a systems alignment approach is that the schools identify families who are at risk. Then Voyage sends out a community health resource advocate, which is like a community resource advocate, which is much like a community health worker, to meet with that family. They establish a set of goals for that family and do coordinated care. And they ensure that the family is making steps towards their goals by connecting them to all of the human services resources that are part of that network. In doing so, Voyage has used systems alignment to move the needle, especially in the early learning fourth grade reading space over the last several years. I've already talked about Health and Human Services offices located in the school building. Certainly Hartford was not the only place to do this. Let me give you a third possibility. So this actually comes out of Pennsylvania with a network that I'm working with right now. They have a new program that they're calling Hello Baby that they think about as part of their network efforts around systems alignment. What that has meant is that the county is working with local birth hospitals, and the birth hospitals are able to identify families that they think might be at risk. And then rather than getting the families in the the Child Protective Services system and all the things that that entails, home health workers visit at-risk families from various local nonprofits who do a home visiting program. And in that home visiting program, they develop plans and do parenting education. And by doing so, they're able to protect the family against some of the social problems that they might experience, which would keep a child from succeeding in preschool, which would keep them from being able to enter into kindergarten ready, right? It's starting much earlier in the process by using, even in that moment of a hospital, working with a family and bringing a new baby into the world, to integrate that moment into a larger system. Last one, many of you, because you're part of FCAN and many of the college access programs, are aware of the Pathways programs, the National Pathways programs. One of the things the Pathways programs have done across the country is work with local businesses to provide bridges between vocational programs in high schools and jobs that are ready for students once they graduate from that and have achieved their credential. Those programs are a great example of systems alignment, because the student knows when they complete that credential or that certificate, it's going to pay off. They already have that workplace experience or internship. They've seen what that career can look like. And it's a way to align systems of local businesses with what's going on in the high schools. So systems alignment isn't really about new programs. It isn't really about learning, but systems alignment ultimately is about making sure that the different parts of what's going on in a community work together so that you end up achieving more, because the programs benefit and complement each other. So we started this presentation with a question: how do networks create a social impact? For networks that are larger, like Future Ready Collier, who don't live in these small rural communities, what we found in our research is it's difficult to program your way to social impact. Instead, ultimately, the theories of change that work in larger communities are combining learning so that everybody is improving the quality of their programs and services, and systems alignment so that those different programs and services work together and enhance one another. And so ultimately, that's a pathway forward here that is increasingly, as the network takes on to its next stages, building on what has already come before it. I'm really excited about your next steps. And I'm really keen to turn into David and to Peggy and to hear more about what happens in the coming years, because you've already done the groundwork that's necessary in order to build systems alignment and learning into your network. One of the things that we've learned by studying networks is that often it takes 4 or 5 years for networks to get to the point where they're ready to have the trust and the accountability to engage in systems alignment and learning. And everything that David and Peggy have been telling me suggests you're ready. You've got the trust built up in the network. You know what each other has done. You've had some successes. And now might be the time to take on to your next steps and to get closer to your goal of a Future Ready Collier. And with that, I will hand the microphone back to David and back to Peggy to close us out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Shoemate. It's exciting and confirming some of what you've shared of where we are going directionally, but also some areas we can definitely consider. And we are right at that 5-year mark. So we're definitely at a great point to continue our forward momentum. And it will be exciting. We'll make sure to share that with you and continue to keep you posted on how things are going.